Tesla's stock price to 1,000 a share by February 10th of 2020. Way or no way? That's our subject for today, and we'll have our usual health tips and a few other items on Tesla to follow. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. So, I want to also thank our Patreon supporters as well as our subscribers. If you enjoy, please take time to like and subscribe, and we could definitely use some help on Patreon, as well as both Patreon as well as we've got a few other. We've also got our PayPal support info there as well. You have to pardon us. We're doing a lot of things to work hard to improve our sound quality as well as how the show looks, and I appreciate your indulgence. So, we did a show yesterday, and the show was about misunderstandings. And basically, as analysts and other folks get a good understanding of what's going on, it's causing Tesla stock price to actually do very well. And we were proposing $1,000 stock price, and the logic of it is what I'd like to cover. So I wanted to review with you first a Silicon Valley story. So if you go around the world, a bunch of different companies work differently in terms of metrics you can use to understand those firms. So I'll give you an example. If you look on your map, there's a restaurant called MacArthur Park, which is in Silicon Valley. It's right next to Stanford. So what's interesting about MacArthur Park is this is probably 4.5, 5 years ago. It was first week of September, and I went there to have to their happy hour, and one of the waiter looked at me and he said, "Something very strange just happened." And I was like, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, there was a party for Google, and when the executives from Google came in, they bought every bottle of wine in the place that was worth $100 or more and drank it. And so we're sort of completely wiped out of the most expensive stuff we have." And so I looked at him and I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" And so this was just after their earnings had been completed, and they were having their after quarter party. And so they announced earnings, I want to say maybe 2 weeks later, and the stock price jumped 15% after earnings into the following morning, driven by those quality numbers. And so I was kind of stunned, because I was like, man, it'd been nice to try to figure this out ahead of time. And so one of the phenomenons of Silicon Valley is that there are a lot of contractors that work in the valley. So what happens is people are either having blowout parties because the numbers were good, or they fire all their contractors as a way to get the numbers down to meet what Wall Street's expectations are. And because they're contractors, they don't hit the balance sheet as full-time employees. So it's kind of one of the games that the Valley uses, and you can almost sort of track the parties in the Valley and their size, and anticipate what the earnings might have been from the entity that's having the party. It's sort of the concept I wanted to present. So what I'm really getting at is the way things work in Silicon Valley is a little bit different than it works in other places, and there are very narrow metrics that if you see them, it might be a way for you to better understand what's going on with the company and the stock. And so we're kind of chasing that today. So the end of where I'm going in my conversations in this part of the show is that there's this thing happening. So let's look in general at Tesla. Tesla did 370,000 vehicles last year, the calendar year, and we're obviously getting into the new year now. So what's happening is that basically you have a company with 360,000 vehicles sold that has a $100 million market cap, and that market cap is driven by the uh, the driver for all of that is just the fact that they have growth potential, where that growth is going, et cetera. So what I wanted to review today in terms of the stock price target that I'm putting out there is some very sort of interesting numbers along the way and no way discussion that we had previously. So um, one of the data points that came up from one of our viewers, and we've kind of been hearing this casually as well, is there is there's an interesting thing happening in China, which is Tesla has 29 service facilities, and they're supposed to get up to 49 of those. We don't know how many of them, but let's call it there are 3 of them that are doing 300 cars of sales a day. Another data point we got recently within the last couple of days is there are places where the people are 20 deep inside of the store, and and so and then there's a queue outside of people trying to get in. So that's the sort of those are some of the data points, much like this whole bar phenomenon that I just shared with you. So what I was so I want to do the way and no way, but I just have all these data points and they sort of conflict. So we'll have to figure out how to put them in which category. So the company, so Tesla came out and said, we're making 280 vehicles a day. They said, we're making 1,000 deliverable vehicles a week. And we're on target to be ready to go for 3,000. So that's what the statement was by Tesla. So that's an interesting point they made because, number one, um, there's this problem, which is if you have one store that's ordering 300 vehicles a day and you're making 280 vehicles a day, in theory, you're just one location on a daily basis. You could just ship all the cars made in China to that location and you're done. So, so, so as a result of how the numbers are working, they're getting a bigger and bigger backlog from that business. So the question that's coming up then is, okay, what are the real numbers is really what I'm trying to figure out. And another data point is that in Fremont in the tent, they're putting together 128 cars per day by hand, and they're doing it on 2 shifts. So I want to say they're doing 128 per shift, but it might be the opposite, 2 shifts for 128. My point is that just out of the tent, they can get 128. So, you know, that 280 number for a fully running automated line sounds a little bit low to us, but we'll go through logic. So, in essence, Elon and company are saying we're doing 280 cars a day, we're doing 1,000 a week, but we're capable of doing 3,000. So, if you have workers going 6 days a week times, let's say 300, you know, that's more like 1,800 cars. You know, that kind of feels like 1,800 cars now. I'd say double that with 2 shifts. You know, now you're getting into, let's say, almost 4,000 vehicles a week. So what I'm really getting at here is we're getting numbers from the company, and then when the drones go up, we're getting other numbers. The issue is that, you know, Elon and company are putting out all these numbers, and we don't think they reflect reality because basically the way the numbers are looking, one store alone for Tesla could consume all the production of the factory for the next, call it 6 months to a year, and all the other locations get no cars. So this is a interesting, like, wow, that suggests no way because they can't produce enough cars to meet the demand is basically what we're getting at. So another question mark is that one of the problems Tesla's been having in their facilities here in the U.S. is that people will go in and look in those mall locations and look at cars, but it's a lot more people looking at the cars and a lot less people actually uh, purchasing. So we were thinking, well, what if the people that are queuing up outside the store are really there to just take a look at the cars and they're not interested in buying? And so that's a distinct possibility. The problem with that, though, is those stores, especially the first 29, have been there for at least 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So if your goal was simply to Google the cars, you wouldn't need to queue up outside, and you definitely wouldn't need to go 20 deep inside the store. So we kind of have to assume that those people are legitimately potential, uh, you know, they're definitely potential customers, basically. So um, the question mark is, why are those people all queued up outside when we were told that Tesla might have bad numbers because of a bad economy in China? And the answer that we're coming up with is the Chinese government has come up with something called "Let me make you an offer you can't refuse." And what that is that basically the Chinese government has come up with these rules. And what those rules are is that it can take 5 years to get an ICE vehicle. There's all these fees that go with it. You have a limited number of days you can drive your vehicle if it's ICE. So up to now, most of the people who could afford Teslas were very wealthy because between the expensive S's and X's available, combined with the tariff and taxes, you're up in that crazy $100,000, $150,000 for a car zone that most people couldn't afford. So the logical assumption is that we have to go back and say, hey, all those people queuing up are legitimate potential buyers, because at $42,000, you have perhaps 3 million people who are viable candidates to actually purchase a vehicle at that price point. And because of all the Chinese pressure to get people into EVs, they're incentivized to do so. So if we even step back further, there are analysts saying Tesla's going to do 50,000 vehicles in China this year. And we thought that was interesting because why would you build a plant that can produce at its peak 500,000 vehicles and only produce 50K out of it? And one answer would be there isn't a marketplace in terms of demand, so therefore you're stuck producing at that level. So, so basically, one of the things that we came up with that's kind of insane, but that kind of makes sense, is that forget about the rest of the world. What we're seeing happening right now is that there's the potential, I'd say it's 5%, that in China they produce 350,000 vehicles this year. If they actually do that, separate from all the rest of Tesla, you could argue that just China is a $100 billion company by itself. Forget about the United States. So here's how we end up with some really amazing numbers that kind of potentially pop up in terms of the stock price, is that, I was trying to go through data points with you, and my equivalent of the restaurant in Silicon Valley was having people 20 deep, and they have to use a bullhorn to control the crowds of people trying to buy. And so what we're sort of getting at is the fact that the data produced that can be confirmed can validate a whole bunch of things. So that's sort of the lane that we're going down, and each piece of data we get that supports the thesis, the better. So, I don't think there's any way that Tesla produces less than 100,000 vehicles in China this year. But with the Model Y being introduced sometime in the next month or two, we think they'll sell everything they can make, and we think they can at least make 150 to 200,000 vehicles this year, in a calendar year. But who knows, with the right amount of batteries, they could in theory get to 300,000 to 400,000 vehicles. And so because the goal of China is to get this EV thing, particularly Tesla's thing, up to 2 or 3 million vehicles by 2025, at least, if not more, you now have a situation where the valuation of Tesla at, let's say, $1,500 a share is the equivalent of 3 million vehicles being produced in the United States by 2025. Uh, and so 3 million vehicles sold, period, by Tesla by 2025. What I'm saying is Tesla China is sitting there with the potential to do 3 million vehicles by itself by 2025. So you now start to get a feel for the fact that there's a lot of different numbers that are out there. And the challenge that pops up is that when you have all these numbers floating around and a disincentive for Tesla to tell the whole deal, you kind of have a situation where this is why the stock is so volatile and unpredictable, because all of the data that we're using to assess what's going on is sort of sitting, what's sitting on the ground right now, and we can't see all the data the company's looking at, like what's your order book look like, how many people have put deposits in for the Model Y and Model 3 in China. You know, there's all these questions that are going unanswered, and this, I think, is why you have arguments about from hedge funds like it's going under or all these other things. And it's at a disadvantage for the company to reveal the information early, because if they do so, there are other consequences that could go with it that we described in terms of supply chain attacks by competitors and other things that are going on. So what we're hunting for, trying to get to today then, is the fact that there's an interesting phenomenon, which is there's, there's a huge number of people trying to purchase the car at $42,000 in China. And we reviewed all the reasons why 300 miles of range. So the core logic is the same as it is in Europe and the United States. You have 300 miles of range approximately. You have supercharger backups that are countrywide. You have competitors that don't have spare parts for their vehicles and their warranties expire very quickly. You have all the ingredients of Tesla taking a huge market share in existing EVs and then reaching over into the regular cars and snatching people from there as well. And I think that the numbers that we're getting out of all these people trying to rush into the store to buy the car is sort of a confirmation of that. But all those numbers artificial, so therefore you can't base the current stock price on that unless you're an analyst that sends somebody there to sit, watch what's going on, and then pull numbers from it, to make a statement. So the reason why we chose $1,000 a share, and we thought it wouldn't happen till June, is really simple. Sometime in the next, 30, 60 days, people are going to figure out that China has the capacity and the resources to deliver to just China as many cars as Tesla is delivering in the entire world. And once this sort of realization happens, I think it just catapults the stock forward. So the argument against this really right now is we haven't seen those customers show up and buy the car, so therefore, from a fundamental analysis, it doesn't exist. The issue, though, is that if you go and see all those people, the cars are sold out, the wait time is extending. So so basically, that's what's happening. So the next reason we chose February 10th is, as you know, the 3-day rule. So what's happening is that it takes time for the analysts to digest, rewrite their estimates, and then ship that out to their clients, the large institutions, and then those institutions are buying, selling based on the analysis that was presented. And so, yes, we'll see a big move around the 29th, which is hedge fund driven. And then after that, up or down, you're going to start seeing the stock move because the back-end S&P impactors are going to start rolling in, et cetera. So what I'm sort of chasing here is just the fact that, we're calling it a thermonuclear reaction will occur on that day. And how the data plays out in the manner I just described is an example of why we're anticipating this thermonuclear reaction. And my goal this morning was to sort of run down some general numbers to you that articulate the fact that, yeah, at the growth rate they're doing, at the level of demand that's somewhat artificially created by the country, all these numbers are easily doable in terms of them moving out, 400,000 cars. Again, what we think is the driver for the stock going absolutely bananas, and we thought it was going to be that they're going to build another gigafactory. What's actually happening is that they're starting the process of building attachments to the current facility that reflect the vehicle demands. And as they're building those extra attachments, they sort of have, a gigafactory of 4 or whatever 5 that's sort of being built as an adjunct to the current one. So you have all these things that are going on. So in general, one could argue we don't have enough data to make the decision on whether or not this thing is really worth what it is currently, and that is that it has this monster growth rate that's sustainable, and the consumers are coming aboard to do this. And so that clarity is why we think as soon as it's cleared, you could end up with a huge situation. So Graham, do me a favor and send us over at Teslafaninsight on Facebook a couple of photos of the 20 deep buyers in China, because that way our viewers can get a look at that as well. I appreciate you referencing that several times. Anyway, so I'll have to check on Twitter. Thank you. So, the issue that's coming up is that we sort of like to be ahead of the curve, if you will. Here, we're not really. It's a fascinating situation, and we look forward to sort of keeping on top of it. Now, I think our next show is going to be one of the instigators of upward moves for stock has been Jim Cramer, and one of the comments just came across that was referencing the fact that he did a shift where he was discussing the fact of Tesla being sort of graded out price-wise as a technology company more so than an auto company. And so I think that that's valid, particularly when you have this whole discussion of autonomous vehicles and the robo-taxis coming in, and the fact that there's been a price point, a dollar value put on that business, and it's now one of the underpinnings of the value of the stock price, even though the governments won't allow it to be used currently. And by the way, do not put it past the Chinese to allow Tesla to do small experiments with this. And if that starts happening, remember when I said the stock price could go crazy? If that experiment is initiated and allowed in China and it works out, there are a bunch of other places in the world that will be under pressure to actually execute the same thing. So, we like for the show to be very clean, and we go someplace and we're guaranteeing that spot. Clearly, there are issues that are lurking that could limit all this. I mean, for example, you just saw the lockdown in different places right now because they're having a health scare in China. Might that affect things? I guess it's possible. But again, the literal issue is that China has made an offer to its population which they cannot refuse, which is, do you want to walk or do you have a car? And so I think that a lot of the people that are middle class are choosing the best car option they have available, and that number of people is really large, and they're making Tesla at 80% the choice in that quality price section. So anyway, we look forward to sort of adding to this conversation going forward, because we're going to get a lot of answers next week, and we can kind of go from there to see how and where things are going. But we thought it was worthwhile to sort of just get a flavor for this a bit. Looking forward to any questions you might have as we close out today. Wanted to note I'm headed to the gym right now to get a little workout in and breakfast. But we're kind of looking forward to what's going to happen next. If I were to answer the question, what do I think is going to happen in the next, let's say, so today's Wednesday, you're trying to killed people on Friday, by Friday. So we, I would say by Friday, we should have a couple of downgrades on Tesla based on valuations by people paid by the hedge funds. And so we're kind of looking forward to, you know, this popping up in the next, day or two, because it's a desperate situation. Tesla will come with numbers middle of next week. And if you're going to try to get out before it explodes, I think this is the time, and the best way to do it is to sort of enlist the help from an analyst to do that. So, it'll be interesting to see how that's done. Um, Someone just mentioned there have been some new installs in in in, uh, in LA, and one of them is one of Elon's homes. I thought it was interesting. He's doing a solar sunroof, which is kind of different, and it looked good and seemed to work pretty well. Almost, it looked to me almost like he put the roof from a Tesla on a sunroom, and it looks really nice. And we'll see what happens. Anyway, you know, Jürgen just mentioned that it's 6.70 a gallon for gasoline in Holland, and I guess one of my worst pieces of Tesla analysis was the fact that I thought Europe would be way bigger than the United States for adoption of Teslas because of the difference in fuel prices. But then I learned that the taxes are so high on new vehicles there that it pretty much wipes out the fuel tax advantage that I just talked about. So hence we're seeing, obviously Tesla do well, but not nearly as well as they could if in fact they didn't have big taxes that went with new vehicles there. So interesting point. Anyway, don't forget 25 leg lifts. Don't go to bed within 2 hours of eating, preferably 4, so the food digests. Want to encourage you to consider a 5-2 diet or one of the other out there. The other recommendation, I think that covers it from the health standpoint. Also wanted to note that obviously exciting times on the 29th, and we're all looking forward to seeing what happens here. It's going to be very, very amazing and interesting. And, Elon mentioned the battery day. I wanted to note that we're going to keep up our daily, but we do have probably a couple of shows, obviously with no ads in them. They just take clips from Elon's last long interview, because I think there are some amazing comments that were shared there that I didn't know. For example, Elon explained that when you're doing a startup, it's a pretty intense situation where it's 80-hour weeks. And so when he invested in help get Tesla started, he actually was working hard, 80 to 100-hour weeks to get SpaceX going. So he was actually trying to avoid being the CEO of Tesla, but they ran into huge problems with the person they chose, and hence he basically became CEO of 2 companies at the same time. And that's mind-blowing. And so it was explained that, let's say you have 80-hour weeks at 2 different companies, they're only 169 hours, in a week or something to that ilk. And he was spending that much time, rolling between 2 companies for several years, which is an amazing feat. So I think, interview was excellent, and I think, there's some really, great nuggets there that I think are worthwhile to take a peek at. Anyway, I want to thank all of you for joining us. We look forward to our next show. Topics are appreciated or suggestions. Yep. Anyway, German, tschüss, macht's gut, au revoir, lehiv brot, hoda hafez, zdravstvuyte, Russian, hello, ni hao ma, is Chinese hello, hejdo, from our friend Donovan. Thank you, Graham, Karsten, Donovan. I think Jerry was in there. A number of you said hello. Appreciate your doing so. I actually look forward to your comment post-show, as well as indulgence as we try to improve our sound quality here through different methods. Merhaba, hello in Turkish. Terrific. In Jamaica, we say, "Enough respect, walk good, man." Have a great day. Thanks and bye for now.